When Jeff and Juanita Arbus came to the Sault from Toronto 15 years ago, they knew this city had a small Jewish community and that it would be a challenge to maintain their faith.
So, yeah, I'm much more involved in Jewish life and synagogue life than I ever have been when I lived in Toronto before I moved to the Sault, because it really comes down to the question of we have to do it. If it's not us, then there is nobody.
That's a Sault Ste. Marie television news report from 1991. The station was interviewing Jeff Arbus, a longtime leader of the local Jewish community, about why the Northern Ontario city's Jews were celebrating Hanukkah instead of Christmas. In the story, you can see Jeff's daughter Tova Arbus wearing a party dress, her hair tied in a stylish side ponytail. She was about 7 or 8 years old at the time, while the community gathered in the Beth Jacob synagogue. The Jewish community in the Sault has been there for a lot longer, well over a century, from the founding immigrant fur traders and store owners like Nate Himmel, with the community at one time numbering maybe 200 people or more and enough young families to build 2 Hebrew school classrooms. But it's been in decline. Today it counts an estimated core of 35 families, including some who come from across the river in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. For decades, the Arbuses and others ran the synagogue's programming and all the festival services except during the high holidays when they could afford to hire clergy to come to the Sault and lead services. But last year, for the first time, there wasn't enough funding to do that. So Arbus and his daughter Tova, who's now 40 and president of the synagogue, did it themselves with other members of the congregation. Tova Arbus will be taking over her dad's role at this year's high holiday services, stepping up after some sudden health issues forced her father recently out of commission. Like her father said, for Tova Arbus, a mother of 2, it's a question of, if I don't do it, who will?
It feels like it matters a lot, that there's still active Jewish communities in small towns in Canada, in small towns in Northern Ontario, that you don't have to be in a big bustling center to be Jewish. And in fact, how much more important it can feel in some ways when you're having to be very intentional.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, September 17th, 2025. Welcome to North Star, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible thanks to the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Gronowski-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Jeff Arbus is a highly respected former labor union leader who moved to the Sault from Toronto in 1979 and settled there with his wife Juanita, a nurse. The newcomers raised Tova and her 2 sisters and injected the local Jewish community with renewed energy over the last 40-plus years. Tova Arbus is already known in the Sault in her own right, especially in the theater community. Now she's been busy planning a meaningful high holiday month at Beth Jacob and also busy helping the city mount an exhibit on the area's Jewish history as part of the unaffiliated egalitarian conservative Reform synagogues marking its 80th anniversary beginning next year. Tova Arbus joins me now from her home.
Thanks for having me.
So first of all, we should introduce you and your yichus, your family's roots in Sault Ste. Marie for people who don't know.
Sure. So actually, we're kind of newcomers. We're just one generation deep here in Sault Ste. Marie. My dad grew up in Toronto. My mom's also from Southern Ontario. And he came up here for work. Not related to the synagogue or the Jewish community at all, but that spiritual side of things was always really important to him. So he made contact very early on. And the timing of when he and my mom got involved with the synagogue was a bit of a similar transition to what we're going through currently, where lots of the younger people had moved away, gone to the big city, wherever they were off to, and the community was getting smaller and they weren't quite sure what the future held. There was a group of them who said maybe that was the end. And my dad and mom were part of a group of kind of new members who were in that younger category, who were having children, who said, this is really important to us. And they helped to work with the current members at that time to just revive the synagogue a little bit and bring back a Hebrew school and just always have been really deeply involved. And that was the model I grew up with. So I was born and raised in Sault Ste. Marie, grew up at Beth Jacob Synagogue here have multiple Jewish bubbies and zadis through that community.
Adopted ones. Air quotes.
Adopted ones,
Yeah.
of course. Yes, yeah, the synagogue family that we have. And I just always had that model of watching folks passionate and determined to continue living and being Jewish, even in a place that was isolated from many other Jewish connections, and working really hard to build a synagogue that was a community and a center point for us all here. Now I get to have the privilege of doing some of that for my own kids.
Are they B'nai Mitzvah age yet or not yet?
One's coming up. I have my oldest turning 12 this December.
How is the lessons being taught? Who's doing it?
It's very piecemeal. My dad was deeply involved with that with my oldest for a while. And then as circumstances changed, we've kind of looked within the community. So I take some of that on. We have some connections with a couple of the synagogues in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan because we are a Twin Sault synagogue. So through that multi-nation connection, we were able to connect with some of the synagogues down there. And we do some online learning with their educational leadership. And we have a newcomer to the Sioux who, when he lived in Toronto, was doing family programming and stuff. So he's involved as well. But we are figuring it out in kind of the hard way. And I think the blessing of the internet and remote learning will really serve us here. We just don't have the depth of knowledge in our congregation right now to be able to do it self-serving like we have every other generation. So remains to be seen. My kids will be the guinea pigs.
Why is it so important to you to continue to keep this community going and even maybe growing in the future?
That's a tough one for me to answer. It just always has been, is the easy one. You know, I grew up in this community. I went and lived other places, but always came back. And there's just something really special about our synagogue. And of course, I have a very biased view of that because this is my hometown. But I've talked to other folks as well, newcomers who come here, and we've just managed to create a community here that really truly cares about each other, and we really are a family, and that has always kept me anchored back here, even in the years where I bounced around post-university, wasn't quite sure where I was going, was not going back to Sault Ste. Marie. But here I am raising my kids here, and that matters to me. And I think a lot when folks ask me that question, like, oh, what is it even? Why are you even there? Like that congregation is just going to disappear like lots of other ones in small communities. And when I get that challenge thrown at me, I think back to a conversation I had with a friend of mine, person that I grew up with. We both went to Hebrew school here. We're both deeply involved with the community. He went on to become a rabbi and a spiritual leader, but moved to the big city. I stuck around here. And at one point he challenged me and said, well, are you even really Jewish there? And I said, well, yeah, I think we all are. And I think we probably work a lot harder at being Jewish up here than someone who has the privilege of living in a big center where there's multiple synagogues to choose from, where going to a kosher deli or grocery store is, can do that. So because there's always been that necessary intentionality to choosing to be part of the synagogue, to choosing to show up, to choosing to take Friday night off and not go to the hockey game, to go to synagogue.
To the Sioux Greyhounds, in case anybody's not. And there must be some Jewish players or Israeli players cycling through. I'm sure there are.
There has been one for sure that we know about. And of course, he came to dinner at our house all the time because what do you do with a Jew from away, right? Try to keep them here. So, I always lean into that intentionality. And I think that as I've been raising my kids and thinking about what is this congregation, what is being Jewish anyway, that I now have to impart to these young people and hope that they make those same choices for themselves. You always hope your kids are going to grow up and keep being Jewish, right? I started to realize how much a part of my core self this community has always been. And I missed it when I lived in other places and I would go to new synagogues and I didn't know anybody and the vibe was just different. And they were wonderful places with great people, but it wasn't my place. I'm really proud of our little community that we've managed to sustain and that we can keep going all these years later, even as there have been wave after wave of exodus from the Sioux, of people leaving in droves, of young people not sticking around, of young people who do stick around and choose not to be Jewish in their daily practice anymore or don't want connection to the synagogue. I don't know. Maybe it's a very romantic idea that I can be part of it, and we'll save it together, those of us that are around. But
Can you give me numbers in terms of what's in the community?
that's a tough one. It kind of ebbs and flows. I think on a regular basis, I can count on about 15 to 25 people coming out. That includes kids, dependents, whatever. On my mailing list, I've got about 35 families who are the core membership. There's about 150 names on my mailing list, but a lot of those are folks who just don't live here anymore, but still feel connected to the community, want to get the weekly mail, monthly mailings, want to get updates on the events, want to know what's going on, want to come back to an event when they're here.
And is the synagogue egalitarian? I remember reading the article from the 50th anniversary where they had more women involved.
Oh, yes, and very necessarily so.
You have to. Exactly. Otherwise, what?
We would never have a minyan ever if we only counted the men. We are a congregation that is egalitarian. We follow the conservative prayer book, but we're conservative reform in our leanings. We are not affiliated anywhere, and so we are a bit of a unique. We're very, very much our own. We work really hard to include lots of English. We have leaned into what's happening in reform, where they do a lot of music, where it's about the meaningful 2 or 3 phrases in a prayer rather than
The
feeling like you
whole
need to do
thing,
the
yeah.
whole. And as we've kind of moved into this new transition phase, the question has come up a lot. What do you want? I can tell you what synagogue could be or should be, and we can deliver that. But we have the privilege, being small and not being affiliated anywhere, that we can really shape this however we want. So depending on who leads services, the feel is a little bit different. And because we're not strongly trained Hebrew readers, we miss some things when it comes to that kind of spiritual education. But we make up for it with that ruach. And it's like, okay, we don't know that, so let's find out together. There have been services where we sat together and just learned the melodies for a new prayer instead of just reading the prayer and moving on.
Mm-hmm.
There have been times where we've sat together and said, okay, well, why do we even do this anyways? Does it matter? And that made up maybe the Devar Torah portion of our service.
I want to come to your service. It sounds fascinating and interesting and meaningful.
Ever since October 7th, 2023, Muslim and Jewish communities in Canada have been torn apart.
I've known you for 20 years. You've been at my house for Shabbat supper, I don't know how many times. And for 1 second, you can't put down your friend and just hold my hand?
We're fed a constant stream of Jews and Muslims talking at each other, about each other, but rarely do we hear them talking to each other.
There was, why are you doing this? What's the benefit of doing this?
This podcast aims to do something different. I'm Avi Feingold, a rabbi and a writer with the Canadian Jewish News.
I'm Yafa Sakeja, a Canadian-Palestinian entrepreneur and volunteer with the Canadian Friends of Standing Together.
We're sitting down with Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Palestinians from coast to coast and across the political divide, having difficult conversations in good faith.
We are not the Israeli government. Palestinians are not Hamas.
This is the place where we're both supposed to end up, Israeli and Palestinian, Arab and Jewish.
Subscribe to In Good Faith, wherever you listen to podcasts.
It's coming up to Yontif, to the high holidays. How does the community, like small communities elsewhere, do they have a hired rabbi that comes, or you do it yourself?
Typically, we have been a congregation that is lay leader led. We have not had a rabbi in service here since I think I was a baby. When it came to High Holy Days, all of the years that I remember growing up, we would hire in a rabbi and cantor team, and they would come and do the services. We had some former congregants who'd gone off to live in other places who came back and led services for us. Their path had taken them into a role of rabbi or cantor adjacent. And then last year, we ran into the difficulty of acknowledging that we are a shrinking congregation with the challenges of finances that go along with not having a huge membership. And we could not afford to hire anybody to come in last year. So last year, my dad and myself and one other congregant led the services. And I am getting ready this year to take on that leadership myself and the one young man that I'd mentioned who's getting involved on the educational side of things, but he's a relative newcomer to the congregation and one of the few who can read Hebrew fluently and understand what we're talking about. So he and I are going to take that on this year and hope for the best. It'll be different than what we've ever done before, that's for sure.
Now, you mentioned your dad.
Yeah, what I'm comfortable to say about it is that he had a significant health change unexpectedly that has taken him out of the city and out of his leadership roles. And that was a bit shocking to the community. It happened very suddenly. We were just starting to think about what is our longevity plan here? What are we doing as we acknowledge, he's not the only core key congregant who has dealt with some really significant changes in their lives. Over the past year, there's at least 4 or 5 who've been impacted, either have passed on or have had to move to access the health services that they need. And it kind of left us scrambling a little bit. I think even though we all acknowledged how much that core of folks have been doing for the synagogue, when they suddenly were gone, and when my dad stepped back, like he was really the it when it came to our spiritual leadership, especially for services and things like that. So it was a huge, huge hole to fill. We're still kind of navigating through some of that. And quite frankly, it's one of those conversations where we sit down at executive meetings to try to plan and we all just blink at each other for a while because, how do you magically make some influx of people who want to come here and live flexibly Jewish, but Jewish enough that they still want to come to a synagogue? That part is really challenging. So not quite sure what we're going to do moving forward. My dad's voice is still involved. He's got his mental health, thank God, and is able to pass on lots of notes and things, but is just not here and not available. And it's come down to the few of us who are younger to take some of this on.
It's quite the shoulders and big shoes to fill as well, and responsibility. So first, we're wishing him a refuah shalema, of course. But in terms of some bright spots, I was told that there is a Hebrew school.
So as I mentioned, there's only a couple of kiddos. If we really shake hard, there's a few other families, I think 4 families in total that have little ones. We just had my kids and one other family with their son who were even of an age bracket to want to be doing some learning. And I tried really hard to get, could it be family focused? Could it be anyone in community who wants to come and learn? There's lots of folks in the congregation who don't have a deep knowledge, a depth of knowledge or education, and they just grew up Jewish, right? And you just learn things and you don't really know why sometimes, you just do it. So we tried to get some of that going, and then COVID got in the way of that. And then coming back afterwards, I focused instead on kind of one-off programming where we'd get together. Okay, there's festivals or holidays coming up. Let's get together and we'll do some learning and activities focused on that. Maybe when it was, Israel's Independence Day, Holocaust Memorial Day, stuff like that. And then this friend of mine moved up from Toronto, and he's younger, doesn't have kids yet, but had been doing family programming at his shul in Toronto and was ready to bring some of that forward. He was with Beth Torah. Just last year, we finally figured out we did like a 10-week session, meeting every second Sunday. And he just offered some anchor point learning. Let's learn a little Hebrew. Let's explore our connection to Israel. So it went over really, really well. And all of the families with young ones came out, including the folks across the river who we don't see as often. And if you're listening, Rubensteins, I'm calling you out. Come to shul. So that was really fun and very successful. And we just started to talk again about what we're going to do this fall winter session. I think it will look like 2 kind of blocks of programming. So we're not in a space where we can do every Sunday regular, but we do these 6 to 8 week sessions with the opportunity to extend as people enjoy. And it's been very meaningful.
Now, before we talk about the 80th anniversary of Beth Jacob, Tova, I want to ask you about any current events such as the community being impacted by protests against Israel or anti-Semitism since October 7th.
Yeah, so the Sault Ste. Marie for Palestine group has mostly been small and insular. They run film nights and things like that. But then in the last 6 months, they seem to have gotten an influx of funding. This newest project of theirs is that they're circulating a petition to try to have, we have a Walk of Nations by our city hall where there's flags from many different countries around the world. I was there with my dad when they raised all of those flags, and we got to raise the Israeli flag on behalf of the community, the Jewish community here.
This was before October 7th.
Oh, yeah. It's been up for years and years and years. And kind of since October 7th, we worked really hard, my dad and I, to connect with the city, to connect with the mayor, to make sure that we had allies there with policing, everything. And they've just been amazing. But yeah, this latest initiative from Sault Ste. Marie for Palestine petitioning to have the Israeli flag removed from this Walk of Nations. So far they only have a very kind of a smattering of signatures, and I haven't seen it publicly advertised outside of their own social media and website, but it's happening. So we obviously reached out to the mayor right away, and he was very clear in reinforcing his allyship of the Jewish community. And he said, whatever's happening geopolitically, social politically, doesn't matter, because what's important is the safety of citizens here in Sault Ste. Marie. And so that's the lens he kind of sees things through, not wanting us to erase our Jewishness. He was also the mayor who, the same year as October 7th, hosted the very first public menorah lighting in Sault Ste. Marie, and the only one in Northern Ontario at that time. So he's a good ally and a friend, and he's trying hard to acknowledge his own biases and gaps in learning and make up for it. Invited my dad to come in and do a anti-Semitism training with he and key leadership at the city, has strongly encouraged when stuff has happened around the community in not so nice ways. He really took on a couple of the host venues, including the local library, to say, well, if you're going to offer space to these people, then you have to do learning on both sides. And I suggest starting with anti-Semitism training. So it's still playing out. We'll see what happens. Who knows where and what that will turn into. I hope it stays quiet.
Thanks for adding that to the conversation. Well, I know that the attention is going to be on your community and the history of the Jewish community in the Sioux because of a new exhibit that the municipality, is now assembling. Tell us about this museum exhibit and what they're hoping to do and what they need.
We started talking about, back a few years, our 75th anniversary. What did we want to do? And I proposed this idea that, well, how can we capture stories? We're in, again, this weird transition with maybe moving towards an end of things here. At that time, we didn't have young families participating, so we were in a real gap. And I said, well, I already work at the museum quite regularly, the Sault Ste. Marie Museum here. They host a lot of the arts events that I'm doing. Let's see if they would help us. And I started to frame this idea that we could do a historical exhibit as part of our celebration. Then COVID happened. Then funding changes happened as a response to COVID. Then all of that kind of coming back post-COVID happened. And now here we are getting ready for our 80th. But this idea was still there. And the lovely folks at the museum just got it. We also worked with the Historical Society on the Sioux, Michigan side of things so that we could tell the Twin Saults and area story. And we've just called out to our congregants, former congregants, anybody who's passed through, to send us their stories, their photos, their artifacts, whatever it might be. And the wonderful team at the museum just collects it all, catalogs it, and makes sure that if folks want their items back, they go back. And if they don't, they go into what is becoming an archive for us at the museum, with the end goal that we will have a live in-person exhibit that folks can come to. I think it'll be up for 3 or 4 weeks, but we'll also have a digital component as well. And that will include a lot of the stories and images and, media that we've discovered along the way, videos that we've unearthed from the corners of the synagogue, all kinds of really interesting things. They also created an interactive opportunity where folks can walk through the downtown, or really lots of areas of Sault Ste. Marie, and kind of explore it through the lens of who was Jewish here and what were they doing.
I mean, people will know Sault Ste. Marie for some of the non-Jewish people who come from there, like the Brad Jacobs, the big curler, or Roberta Bondar, the astronaut, right? And famous Jewish people, you have a specific link to one of them, the author Morley Torgov.
Yep. Yeah. He's our claim to fame, that's for sure, and much celebrated. And his book, A Good Place to Come From, writes really deeply about what it was like to be Jewish in Sault Ste. Marie and kind of the heyday of the Jewish community. But we've cast the net really wide because I think it's important for folks to understand how diverse a Jewish community we are and have been here, and all of the interesting ways that the Jewish community integrated in the broader Sault Ste. Marie community. And I hope that the exhibit will reflect that.
The synagogue had a big celebration of the 50th. Is it possible to do something like that in the future? What are you envisioning?
We are a congregation with a big diaspora. Everybody who's left Sault Ste. Marie and gone to live other places. And they all have families and friends. And so what we are hoping is that we can plan a little weekend of events, which would include time at the synagogue, probably some sort of a Shabbat service, a meal together, and then the opportunity to remount the exhibit at the museum and encourage people to just go exploring.
Yeah, better not to do it in January in Sault Ste. Marie
No.
when that was
You're
when
looking
the
at July.
exhibit is coming up. No.
Maybe we could do Shabbat on the ski hills for a very select group of folks, but no, we're looking more in the summer months. And the goal of it is to try and encourage people who used to live here to come back.
I'm sure people will get in touch with you, and I want to wish you and your family only good health and only better news for the new year. All the best. Thanks so much. And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of North Star, made possible thanks to the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. We put links to the synagogue in our show notes to get in touch about the exhibit. Meanwhile, our condolences go out to the family and friends of Gil Cymbalist, a former Beth Jacob synagogue president. He died September 8th at the age of 80. He was American, a former U.S. Army veteran. He got married at Beth Jacob and then began serving as president and even as the handyman. Here's Gil Cymbalist from 1991 in that same TV report about why his community took matters into their own hands.
We try to teach our children what Hanukkah is about and teach them the difference and hopefully respect for other faiths as well. But if you give them something to celebrate, they're not going to miss Christmas. If they're enjoying their own holidays, they're not going to miss Christmas. They're not going to feel left out.
This episode of North Star was produced by Andrea Varsany and Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and the music is by Brett Higgins. Thanks for listening.